Hello and welcome to my presentation on fatigue and recovery. So, what is fatigue? Fatigue is the inability to maintain a given intensity. This means that there will be a decrease in the work capacity. At an early output, we are able to maintain the level which we work at, so we are fully energized and not fatigued. Yet, fatigue begins to kick in later on as we have been working for a long period of time. The cause of fatigue is event specific. For example, if we completed a 100-meter sprint, we would feel fatigued due to a high intensity event, and like a 10,000 marathon with fatigue, we would feel fatigued all over. It would be a completely different type of fatigue. Fatigue is also down to the type of muscle fiber which is recruited. By looking at the arrow, we are able to see the analysis of exercise for fatigue. The fatigue depends on the type of activity. If it's continuous, we would have a fatigue much higher than it was in intermittent. This is due to us being able to regenerate energy sources. An example of the continuous type of activity would be a bike marathon, or an intermittent would be a sports game such as rugby. The fatigue also depends on which system is used. For example, a 100-meter sprint is more likely to rely on their phosphocreatine system rather than a lactic acid system like a marathon runner would. The fiber also takes an effect on the fatigue, same as the type of muscle contraction. If the contraction is constant, there will be a quicker fatigue rate than an intermittent contraction. The intensity and duration also play a role, as the intensity and duration use different types of energy systems, which has caused different types of fatigue. If there is a high intensity but short duration, there won't be as much as fatigue, which means we won't feel it compared to a low intensity and high duration. The level of fitness of the athlete also depends on the fatigue and how quickly we fatigue. If the level of fitness is a top performer, for example a marathon runner, in the Olympics, they will not fatigue as much or as quickly as someone who just runs for a hobby or for. There are also different types of fatigue. These are three physiological ones, which are local, general, and chronic. Local is where the fatigue is localized in the muscles from repeated contractions throughout recovery. An example of this would be doing pull-ups in the gym continuously. As the exercise is targeted, fatigue would feel localized in the biceps. General is where the post-training or game feeling physically or physiologically weak. This could be after a hard, intense match of rugby or football, where you're feeling weak and fatigued. The last type of fatigue is the chronic type. This is where our immune system feels weak from excessive overtraining and not enough recovery. We would feel this type of fatigue after a marathon. There's a physiological fatigue. This is where we feel weak and fatigued mentally. Different people have different levels of physiological fatigue due to having a stronger motivational mindset. This fatigue depends on the type of person, and it is varied. For maximal intensity and very short duration activity, how does fatigue differ from the two? The type of fatigue, like I have said, depends on the exercise. The exercise also then uses different types of energy sources and also types of energy systems. It also produces different waste products. The cause of fatigue is mostly the depletion of ATP. For short-term, high-intense exercise, there are three main factors which contribute to the fatigue. This includes the depletion of ATP and creatine phosphate in the muscles and an increase in the muscle acidity. The ATP will deplete due to the type of event. As it's short-term and high-intense, the ATP and PC stores will be used, as these systems only take up to 10 seconds. As this is used, this can cause fatigue in the muscles, as there is no PC to resynthesize ATP. Due to the creatine phosphate being depleted very quickly, the ATP production will lower, meaning there will be not enough to cause a contraction. Their intensity will drop due to this. This causes fatigue as well also. Also, if ATP is being consumed quicker than it's made, levels will drop, meaning the intensity will lower. If these sources both lower, this takes an effect on our performance. Performance drops as we have dropped our intensity, and we need to build back up our PC stores for it to then restore our ATP source. When levels of PC are extremely low, this negatively impacts our production of ATP, which means the ATP in muscles are not being produced, which leads to fatigue. Acidity can also have an effect on fatigue. It affects the calcium, which helps with cross-bridging. This results in a high tension in the muscles. This can then lead to fatigue. This can be reduced by supplementation of creatine powder, which can be used after or before working out or an event. By looking at the graph here, the black indicates the athlete which has taken the supplementation. It shows the supplement is allowing the athlete to produce an overall higher amount of total work. We must then recover from this exercise. This is done through the lactic fast recovery process, as we only use our ATP and PC systems. We do not have to remove any waste products. During this process, we resynthesize our ATP stores by supplying our body with energy from the breaking down of PC. PC is then restored through aerobic processes. This recovery takes approximately 3 to 4 litres of oxygen to fully recover from this, about 3 minutes. There will be a high O2 deficit for this exercise. A O2 deficit is a temporary shortage of oxygen during exercise, unless there's 100% energy contribution of aerobic system. As we can see from the graph, we did not uptake a lot of VO2 due to the exercise being anaerobic. This causes a larger O2 deficit. Due to this, the epoch will be larger and it'll take a longer period of time to recover. EPOC stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. So this is where the extra oxygen is consumed and where O2 levels are above resting levels in the recovery. We're able to see this by looking at the EPOC graph. Sporting examples of this would be a 1 rep max test, or an event situation would be a 100 meter, 200 meter sprint. So we rely on our anaerobic system, and this contains the ATP and PC system, as it only lasts long enough to use these systems. From the other graph on this slide, this one here, we can also see that the PC depletion recovers extremely quickly. We can see it depletes massively during exercise but recovers just as quick during recovery. There is another type of fatigue which is more intensity and more duration. This is predominantly used by the lactic acid system. This kicks in when we are working anaerobically and when our stores of ATP and PC are depleted. If oxygen is there, we will not use the system, but if there is no oxygen, the lactic acid system kicks in. It lasts between 10 seconds to 3 minutes, and it builds up a waste product of lactate and hydrogen ions. This causes our muscles to fatigue and become sore. This comes from pyruvic acid being broken down into lactic acid due to insignificant oxygen. The increase of hydrogen ions causes the acidity to go up and denature enzymes and other things. This causes our muscles to burn and feel sore. This is also for a safety reason, as it stops us from damaging our muscle. The soreness causes us to fatigue and eventually rest to recover. This system uses glucose and glycogen for its energy source. This is the only energy source which it uses. Glucose and glycogen supply our body with energy all around, which means once this energy source runs out, we fatigue. Lactate is good as it breaks down glucose. It's broken down and each time this releases energy. Yet, when these stores are fully depleted, we must recover them by eating more food and resupplying the glucose and glycogen. We are able to use soda loading for this. This is where an athlete would try and neutralize the lactic acid that accumulates in the blood. This allows the muscles to work harder and for longer and not to fatigue as quick. The REA is the sort of energy which we use. REA stands for respiratory exchange ratio. If the REA is 1, carbohydrates would be the most dominant fuel. Yet if this is dropped to 0.65 and below, fats would take over, and if this is increased to 0.8, which is normal to value during rest and steady state exercise, proteins would be the most dominant fuel. If this goes above to 0.89, carbohydrates and fats are both used to produce energy. By looking at the set of data below, which we collected from Brighton University investigation, we are able to see which fuel would be used during the stage of the exercise. With the lactic acid system, there comes a lot of waste products and which are produced by the system. It produces lactic acid which accumulates as we exercise. The longer and harder we exercise, the more lactic acid builds up. This affects our performance and it decreases due to our muscles becoming sore, not able to sustain the intensity which we are carrying out. This means we fatigue due to this. As we exercise, our body temperature also increases. This denatures the enzymes by causing our body acidity and pH levels to increase. The higher our temperature, the more acidic our body becomes. The amount of hydrogen ions also accumulates as we exercise. These all contribute to fatigue, as hydrogen ions are things that cause the muscles to feel sore and ache. By looking at this graph, we are able to see the OBLA. We collect this from our data from Brighton University data, where our athlete would cycle for 3 minutes, and each stage the power increased. This is the onset of blood lactate accumulation. This is measured at 4 millimoles of lactate. The OBLA is where the lactic acid builds up and fatigue begins. On this graph, this is around 3.887 millimoles. The power when the OBLA sets in is around 190 watts. This is where the lactic acid in our muscles begins to affect our performance and how we are able to perform. As our performance decreases, athletes look for ways which they can improve our ability with lactic acid. There are ways to neutralize lactate. This is called soda loading. This involves drinking sodium bicarbonate several minutes before an event to try and neutralize the buildup of lactic acid and let us continue at a higher intensity. We then need to recover from this type of exercise. This is a longer period of recovery compared to maximum intensity and short duration. This is because there's a lot of lactic acid which needs to be removed. This can take from hours up to days. The lactic acid must be converted into substances which we can remove. This is done by 65% of it being converted to pyruvate. Then it enters the Krebs cycle and is converted to CO2 and H2O, which we breathe out. 5% is converted to glucose and 20% converted to glycogen. 10% is converted into protein. As we are working at a moderate intensity, there will be a smaller O2 deficit than maximal, but still a large one. The E-book size would be a much longer one, as it's a longer period of recovery and is a slow recovery. This type of recovery would be called lactic acid, as it is the removal of lactic acid, and this can take up to days depending on the exercise. During this recovery phase, the muscle glycogen stores would be replenished, and also the rebalancing of body temperature. There would be some lactic recovery. This would be resaturating the myoglobin with oxygen and then resynthesizing ATP and PC stores. These are metabolic demands. These would be the heart muscle, which needs oxygen to sustain their elevated heart rate and stroke volume. The respiratory muscle require additional oxygen also for elevated breathing rate and tidal volume. From this type of exercise, we also must resaturate the myoglobin and hemoglobin. This needs approximately 0.5 liters of O2 for 100% recovery and takes between 1 to 2 minutes. We also feel DOMS during this type of exercise. DOMS stands for the delayed onset muscle soreness. This is the pain and stiffness felt in the muscles after exercise. This is mostly felt the next day from the exercise. There are strategies to recover from this type of exercise. This can include a warm-up. This reduces the O2 deficit, which means we do not have to repay as much oxygen as we would. Massage also helps with the removal of lactic acid. It eases the soreness of the muscles and influences the muscle to remove the lactic acid. Another type of fatigue is during submaximal intensity and high duration. This type of fatigue uses the aerobic system. There are also 3 things that can lead to fatigue in long-term, low-intensity exercise. These are the decrease of muscle and liver glycogen, increase in the muscle's calcium, and an increase in the body's temperature. Temperature increases causes fatigue due to the more blood being diverted to the skin instead of the working muscles. This causes fatigue as the muscles need blood as that carries the oxygen and other chemicals needed for the muscles to work. Without this, the muscles become fatigued and drop in performance. Muscle and liver glycogen depletion are also a common cause for fatigue during this type of exercise. Additionally, over time, a decline in muscle calcium levels can cause fatigue. For this exercise, the rare would be a mix due to the run of fatiguing later on and relying on other nutrition to supply the body with its energy source. This type of exercise revolves around the use of glycogen and then fat for the energy. By looking at the graph, it shows that at the beginning on exercise when working at 2% exercise, we work from our fat stores. Once this becomes used, we move on to our glycogen and carbohydrate store, which is around 60% of intensity. This is where we become fatigued, as glycogen is the only source for our bodies after the fats. This causes the glycogen to deplete and the stores become empty. Low blood glucose may also reduce the uptake of glucose into the brain. This can contribute to central fatigue.